This is the story of the sisterhood that learns to stand the test of distance and growing up. The four friends, Tibby, Lena, Carmen, and Bridget, have all been together since they were young. 3 summers ago, they acquired a peculiar pair of pants that miraculously fit them all together. They share this garment among themselves, wearing it once a week before giving it to the next one in rotation. It's a weird pact from an outsider's view, but they all credit the pants for the magic of friendship that ties them together, even when they are apart. Now that they are about to graduate from high school, they each have a path that they would like to take. Tibby will be in New York studying scriptwriting. Bridget will join the soccer team at their local college. Lena has received a scholarship from a design school, while Carmen has already joined the theater club at her college. Things seem to be set for the 4 friends, or at least for the 3 of them. Carmen, who narrates at the start of the movie, expresses feeling lost from being away from her friends. With her mother newly married to her second husband, Carmen thinks everyone has moved on, leaving her somewhat alone. They still send the pants to each other on a weekly basis to carry on their tradition. But with the new chapters in their lives, it may be challenging to follow through with the tradition. In the next scene, we see Lena attending the burial of her grandfather, together with her sister Effie and their relatives. When she looks around, she sees Costas, the young man whom she first gave her heart to. Later, she approaches him. Costas expresses his condolences on the passing of her grandfather. Lena accepts his words, but those are not what she wants to hear. She still has feelings for him, and she misses him so much. She tells him how she feels. Before Costas can say anything, a woman calls his name. He feels awkward, but he has to introduce Melia, his wife, to Lena. As it turns out, Costas got Melia pregnant, and he married her to take responsibility. Lena sends this news, as well as her heartache, via email to her friends. Apparently, only Carmen has not read the email. So, it falls on Tibby to relay the news to her. Carmen feels strongly for Lena, but she also can't help but complain about the lack of communication. She moans about how she hasn't heard from anyone in a long while. Tibby brushes it off, and then cuts the call as she enters a video store. She's looking for a part-time job to support herself during summer school. Carmen is a bit startled by the abrupt end of the call, but she needs to focus as their theater show is about to finish. Julia, her good friend, returns backstage after her curtain call. Carmen is one of the assistant stage managers who helps Julia get out of her costume. A stagehand enters the dressing room to give Julia a bouquet of yellow roses, courtesy of her mother. That's when she remembers her acting internship at Vermont for the summer. She invites Carmen, promising to get her a position backstage. Carmen says she has other plans, and she also needs to help her mother, who is now pregnant. In truth, Carmen is looking forward to spending the summer with her friends, as this will be the first time they'll be together since starting college. When summer comes, it's Bridget who first comes home. She greets her father, who looks happy to see her again after a long while. However, one can surmise that the two don't share a deep bond as father and daughter. They both look awkward after the father asks the generic question, "How's school?" In the end, Bridget goes back to her room and spends the rest of the day there. Finally, the quartet meets again at their promised place, the empty yoga hall where their mothers first met. Chatter starts immediately, and it's like nothing has changed. Carmen has brought all the essentials for their meeting: a pair of pants, junk food, chips and chocolates, and a radio to play their favorite 80s hits. They're supposed to do some sort of ritual and prayer to begin their time together. Nothing witchy or dubious, just a set of gestures symbolic of their friendship. Tibby points out that maybe they can ditch those things since they've done them previously. Carmen tries to explain that it's part of their coming together. Lena clarifies that they do care about it, and it's Bridget who says the truth, that those things are not that big of a deal anymore. Carmen is shocked, as this only confirms that nagging feeling she has had for a while. There's a hint of strain among them as they reveal their plans for the summer. Tibby has failed her classes, so she has to return to New York to attend summer classes. Lena will be attending figure drawing classes, while Bridget has been accepted into an archaeological camp in Turkey. Lena gently tells Carmen that she sent them all emails sharing their plans for the summer. Feeling alone, Carmen lies and says that she'll be joining an acting internship in Vermont. Perhaps for the first time in their solid friendship, faint cracks are starting to appear. Bridget has started packing for her journey to Turkey. She is in their basement looking for backpacks when she happens upon a box of old letters. She reads the return address and is surprised to read her maternal grandmother's name. In fact, all of the letters have her return address. This opens an emotional wound for Bridget. She still hasn't healed completely from her mother's passing, and her grandmother was her only link to her. She confronts her father, tossing in front of him the bundle of letters. She demands to know why he has kept all these letters from her when he should have known how much her grandmother means to her. After getting over his shock, the father explains that he and his wife were not on speaking terms with Greta, the grandmother. He says it was in Bridget's best interest that he kept the letters. When Bridget tells him he has no right to do that, he answers that he's only protecting her. Bridget retorts she doesn't need protecting from him because, in case he's missed it, she's been doing it for years. She defiantly walks out of her father's office. Without saying goodbye, she takes her flight to Turkey. There, they are welcomed by Professor Nasrin Mahani, the director of the university program, and the overseer of the dig. She has a motherly warmth in her that immediately makes Bridget feel at home. This dig is her reprieve from her unhealed past. Bridget is enthusiastic about helping others with their tasks. When she and another digger unearth a jaw, she can't help but be excited about her achievement. That night, she wears the pants as the group partakes in a community gathering and dances. She sits beside Professor Nasrin, who checks on how she's feeling so far with her experiences here. Bridget happily describes the parts she's dug up for the past few days, even giving them their own names. Her cheeriness makes the professor wonder about how she treats demise. She asks Bridget if she knows when a person's passing becomes more scientific rather than emotional, because what they're doing is not as simple as digging up bones. Bridget says she doesn't know. Maybe it's when the last person they know has passed away. The professor gives her a knowing look and says she still has a lot to learn from here. Meanwhile, Lena starts with her figure drawing class. She's so conscientious about her board, her charcoal and pencils, and other drawing materials that she appears to be so nervous. A baritone voice asks her if it's her first time. Lena looks up, and she's greeted by the most beautiful man she's ever seen. She becomes more clumsy as she answers his question, while still sorting her materials. When the instructor calls them to get ready, Lena tries to focus on her board. However, she is shocked when the instructor introduces Leo as their model for the day, and the man walks to the podium while removing his shirt. Lena is valiantly concentrating, and that's no mean feat, given that there's a physically perfect male in front of her. Her edginess seems to be reflected in her strokes because the instructor tells her to be more flexible and to emphasize the tension in her figure. She gives a huge sigh of relief when the bell rings. A few days later, Lena receives the pants from Bridget, along with some soil and a picture of her with a human skull. That night, she wears it as she visits the art studio to create more sketches. There, she sees an unfinished painting in the middle of the room. Then, from behind it, comes Leo, who greets her casually. Upon seeing the curiosity on her face, Leo says he gets to use the studio at night in exchange for modeling. They formally introduce themselves to each other. Lena is still awkward. He notices her pants, saying they look unusual. She says it's a long story, to which he replies he likes long stories, especially over dinner. Lena considers this. Since things are over for her and Costas, maybe it's time for her to consider her other dating options. In New York, Tibby meets up with her boyfriend Brian. He says he's asked for a few days off from his work so he can be with her. Tibby feels giddy inside, but she shows none of it, as she likes to pretend that she's not as mushy as other girls. He brings her to his apartment, where they're going to spend the night together. Tibby coyly asks him how he is not like the other boys who play games. Brian is straightforward with his answer. He loves her. They make a toast, with Tibby feeling elated. Brian sits beside her and starts kissing her, and then the kiss becomes more intimate. She still has inhibitions about doing it, but when he promises to use protection, she eventually relents. After the deed, while Brian is in the bathroom, Tibby recites what she likes receiving from him, now that they're officially together. Brian is taking too long, and when he finally comes out of the bathroom, the look on his face makes her nervous. He confesses that the condom broke. Tibby sits straight, as the implication of this crashes down on her. She goes to the bathroom to get cleaned and dressed. When she comes out, Brian tries to appease her. But she has become a bit more indifferent than earlier, saying things about how she needs to work on a school project. She says everything will be okay, even though her face says otherwise. They kiss, and that's it for the night. In the meantime, Carmen goes with Julia to Vermont to attend Village Theater Arts. There, Julia introduces her to Bill Kerr, the director of the theater. It's important to know that Bill is a top-billed theater director, and he has a lot of connections to professional productions. Julia aims to be the star of his production, as this will inevitably push her to stardom. Bill will be producing and directing The Winter's Tale, and he's looking for the right actress to play the role of Perdita. As expected, Carmen has no plans for getting the role, and she's convinced herself she's better off backstage. As she takes her broom onto the stage, she happens upon the audition of Ian, the handsome actor who reads the lines of Prince Florizel. Carmen is so engrossed by the performance that she accidentally sits on the control board that maneuvers the curtains, suddenly closing the stage on him. She rushes to Ian to check on him. Ian is surprised by her frank nature and keeps on looking at her even after she walks away. That night, Ian finds her alone on one of the picnic benches. Carmen asks about his audition, and he says everything is fine. The audition is just for formality since he played in Bill's Romeo and Juliet production last year. She comments that, at least in Winter's Tale, there will be no gruesome ends. Just the average poisoning, child abandonment, and excessive jealousy. Ian is really fascinated by her. He asks if she ever thought about auditioning, to which she says no. She's okay with working backstage. At this, he's perplexed because, as he understands it, anyone in the internship can audition for a role. And when he learns that her name is Carmen, he says it's a name not fit for backstage. Carmen is of course flattered, but she's made up her mind that Julia will definitely get the role. When the audition for the role of Perdita finally comes, Julia recites her lines against Ian. Once that's done and Julia's gone, Ian looks around to find Carmen busy with other stagehands. He knows there's potential in her, so he drags her to the center stage and asks Bill to hear her read Perdita's lines against his. Bill consents. Carmen does it with a great understanding of the character since she actually loves the play. A few days later, the final casting is posted. Julia gets the role of Dorcas, while Carmen gets the role of Perdita. Lena has started going out with Leo. She visits him in his apartment, where she discovers how good he is at cooking. She also realizes that they share some similarities in views when it comes to art. Leo is not just attractive, he has a soul that craves the deep. Everything seems to be going well on Lena's end. One day she receives a call from Tibby, which makes her rush to her friend's side. Since that night, Tibby has avoided Brian's calls. Every time she sees a pregnant lady, or a mother cooing her babies, she gets goosebumps. She's not ready to be a mother, and she's definitely upset that her first night with Brian ended that way. Eventually she meets him. Brian is forthcoming with his feelings, expressing his worries about her, and even enumerating his options, should the pregnancy come through. Then Tibby blurts out, "What about her options?" Unlike him, she can't simply cancel the baby and move on. She has a hard time expressing what she really wants, and most of the time, her words make Brian worry a lot. This frustrates him, leading him to leave her. Tibby receives the pants via delivery. She wears it and profusely asks for a miracle. She calls Lena to bring her pregnancy kit. But before Lena arrives, her period comes, freeing her from the unnecessary pregnancy scare. At a restaurant, Tibby opens up about her experiences. She sent Brian an email about her condition, which Lena finds very impersonal. Tibby defends her decision, saying if she called or texted, he may think things would just return to normal. Which isn't the case. Not for her. She admits she's not very good with relationships. It's like if she starts experiencing something good, something inside her will just rip the good things apart, leaving her broken. It's better not to start anything if that happens, right? Lena looks at her friend empathetically and correctly says she's just afraid. Tibby doesn't like what she hears, but she can't deny the truth. Meanwhile, Carmen calls her mother to tell her about getting cast as Perdita. Her mother is happy for her and asks if her friends know. Carmen says that Julia knows, but the others don't because they're too busy. Carmen cuts the call, as she doesn't want to get awkward with her mother about her friends. She then opens her package from Lena, which contains the pants. Julia sees it and finds it peculiar, but Carmen grabs it from her and tosses it onto her bed, saying it's nothing important. The two friends then proceed to the theater to attend their rehearsals. However, when they get there, the coordinator says only the principal actors are needed, which means only Carmen will stay. This is something new between her and Julia, as normally the latter stays as the principal actor. Anyway, Julia leaves, wishing her friend good luck, but she glances back with a wistful look on her face. Slowly, Carmen enjoys her newfound confidence as she navigates the role given to her. She also enjoys her time with Ian, as they often get together to read their script, or simply read classic novels. While enjoying a peaceful sunset, they practice reading their lines. Carmen wonders out loud why people don't talk so romantically nowadays. She believes it helps in communication, as the words sound good, and saying them also feels good. To her surprise, Ian describes her in poetry, which makes her heart flutter. Their following rehearsals are going well. Carmen and Ian's chemistry is evident as they recite their lines. Carmen is so into it that when she recites one of the more passionate lines of her character, it makes Ian forget his own. It seems like neither Bill nor the others have noticed the unusual closeness between the two lead characters, except for Julia. There are moments when she strongly wants to roll her eyes at Carmen, but she remembers they're in a rehearsal, and she's trying to maintain a good girl image. She also gets envious that Carmen gets closer to Ian. In her mind, she should have been the one who exchanged lines with him, not Carmen. When Julia gets wind of Carmen going on a date with Ian, she shamelessly crashes it by being the third wheel. After a few days, she finally gets an exclusive date with him. Julia makes sure that Carmen sees how she's so much prettier than her, while implying that it's Ian who initiated the date. In a way, she succeeds. Carmen tries so hard not to show any jealousy, because whether she likes it or not, she has developed feelings for Ian. In Turkey, Bridget is enjoying her life. During one of their breaks, they decide to play a game of soccer. Of course, Bridget shines in this, as this is her game. However, one of them kicks the ball a little too far. Bridget offers to retrieve the ball, which happens to have landed in a no-entry area. Still, Bridget continues. The next thing she knows, she falls into an ancient crypt that is still full of artifacts. That night, Professor Nasrin firmly reminds her about the rules on the site, but it looks like she's taken a liking to Bridget, and instead of a long sermon, she tells her that the crypt she fell into was called gyneconitis. It used to be an exclusive quarter for women back in ancient times. Perhaps, this was where Cleo, one of the bones that Bridget had dug up, used to bring her children for education, or for entertaining visitors. Bridget perks up when the professor confirms the gender of the bone. Nasrin says the bone belongs to a female, who stood at just over 5 feet and lost her life at around 35 years old due to an unknown illness. At this, Bridget can't help but be reminded of her mother. The similarities in descriptions hit her harder than they should. She tells the professor about her late mother. Nasrin shows sympathy for her plight. For the next few days, Bridget becomes more serious about her tasks. She requests Nasrin to transfer her to other crypts in the hopes of finding more bones. But Nasrin tells her that archaeology is more than just digging and finding bones. It's about piecing together a story of a forgotten time, using what was left. Nasrin notices the sadness in Bridget's eyes, and she thinks she knows why. She says she, too, lost a lot, but she still finds herself fascinated by what was left behind, what endures. Bridget keeps this in mind. One day, she sees Nasrin greeting her daughter and husband, who are visiting the site. The sight of them makes Bridget realize that she's been delayed for far too long. It's time for her to read her grandmother's letters, which she brought with her to Turkey. Upon opening the first letter and reading her grandmother's endearment for her, she sheds tears. Reading the letters feels like going back to that time when all was still well. It takes Bridget the whole night to read the pile of letters. Then she makes up her mind. She writes a letter to Nasrin, explaining that she's coming home to finally face the reality that she's run from ever since her mother passed away. Lena and Leo are going strong, even though they've only dated for a few days. One afternoon, after the classes, Leo meets her and they share a kiss. Unfortunately, Lena has to go to her next class, so she needs to go. They promise to see each other later that night. As Lena walks to her next class, she is surprised to see Costas waiting for her. What is he doing there? Costas says he just got annulled by his wife. As it turns out, Melia pretended to be pregnant so they would get married. But when she saw Lena during the burial, she realized Costas still had feelings for her. So she revealed the truth. Costas's grandfather allowed the annulment, and right after that, Costas flew back to America to see Lena. He says he wants her to know the truth. But what can Lena do with it now? She is now living a different life. She forgives him for not waiting for her. But now, Lena doesn't know what to do with the healed wound in her heart that has just opened. If Lena is rejecting her ex, her sister Effie is taking someone else's ex. Effie meets with Tibby to catch up and to let her know that she intends to date Brian. Tibby feels a mixture of emotions. She needs to vent them out. So she visits Carmen in Vermont. But Carmen isn't as welcoming as Tibby had hoped. Ever since that night when Julia and Ian went out, she has lost her concentration. Her usual strong lines have become weak, and it's because she can't face Ian while thinking something is going on between him and Julia. Now Tibby is there venting her heart out, and Carmen is just checking her script. She can't help but tell Tibby the harsh truth. She still cares for Brian, and she doesn't want him to date Effie or anyone else. They shouldn't have broken up in the first place. Tibby acknowledges this painful truth, but she notices that Carmen doesn't seem to listen to her. She keeps reading her script the entire time. Tibby points it out, saying she didn't drive here only to be ignored. She only wanted support. Carmen retorts that she can't just stop her life to listen to her. She hasn't heard from her for a month, and now she is here venting. Tibby is shocked. Julia walks in on them at the worst possible time. She recognizes Tibby and calls her the video store girl. Tibby is indignant. Julia is dense, not sensing the tension between Carmen and Tibby. The latter gathers up her things and walks out without saying goodbye. Carmen recognizes that she's let her pride get in the way. Her hurt comes from a place of love for her friends, whom she thinks have already forgotten her. Well, she's not the only one who went through something that night. Lena meets Leo on his apartment's rooftop. He has set the place up with a romantic dinner, and Lena feels appreciated. But since her conversation with Costas, things have never been the same. Leo notices this and asks her what's wrong. Instead of answering, she asks if he's ever been in love. Leo admits that he likes the idea, and he likes taking muses for inspiration, but to be paired with only one is not his style. At this point, Leo understands that Lena is a woman who looks for commitment. It's such a shame that he isn't the one to give that to her. She apologizes as this seems to end their relationship. But Leo is more appreciative of her honesty. He tells her she shouldn't be ashamed to say what she wants. Lena is grateful, but at that moment, she's having some trouble identifying what it is. Meanwhile, Bridget finally arrives in Alabama. She meets Greta, her grandmother. Greta looks like a strong-minded woman. At first, Bridget doesn't know how to talk to her. Eventually, they manage to find common ground. Soon, Greta tells her the real story behind her mother's passing. As Bridget is looking through some old photos, Greta explains that Marley, Bridget's mother, used to be a vibrant girl. However, at one point in her life, she went into a downward spiral and was diagnosed with depression. When Bridget was born, Marley felt so happy. Unfortunately, for Marley, it was either she felt elated with Bridget or she felt so down. That night, Bridget experiences a nightmare. She keeps dreaming about how her mother abandoned her. Greta hears her and comforts her. Bridget remembers that night Marley left her. She demands that Greta tell her the truth. As it turns out, Marley was so sick that she tried to deny the truth even to herself. All she wanted was to stay beside Bridget, the only light in her life. Bridget's father brought her to Greta so he could convince Marley to be hospitalized. Unfortunately, it ended with Marley ending her own. Greta admits her weakness is not being able to stop her daughter. Both she and Bridget's father have thought keeping the whole truth from Bridget would protect her from the pain. Bridget, now knowing the whole story, comes back to her father. She apologizes for being hard on him and explains that Greta has told her the whole story. They may have been at odds after Marley's passing, but starting now, they need to take care of each other. It's what Marley would have wanted from them. They hug each other, with the father feeling relieved that his daughter finally understands how much he loves her and Marley. Meanwhile, Tibby has felt so down for the last few days. Despite this, she still attends her parents' anniversary. To her surprise, Brian is there. Brian is the first one to approach her. The two exes are lost for words. Their last interaction is still hanging above their heads. But even in the few seconds that they stand by the buffet table, they can both feel that the spark is still there. When Tibby sees Effie, she remembers that Brian is dating her now. She chooses to walk away, to avoid any tension. The date for the play is nearing. Bill's production is already on stage for dress rehearsals. However, Carmen still needs to get her act together. It doesn't help that, just before they start the rehearsals, her mother calls. She's in labor, her husband's on the way back from his business trip, and she needs Carmen by her side. Carmen can't come, but she promises to send someone to be with her. The first one she calls is Tibby. Tibby is still sporting from their last interaction, but when she hears the panic in Carmen's voice, she gets ready to listen. Carmen tells her that her mother is about to give birth. Tibby doesn't delay and says she'll be in the hospital in a few minutes. Carmen is still worried. This affects her performance so much that Bill can't help but get disappointed. At the back, Julia smirks as she can see the downfall of her friend. After the rehearsals, Carmen is so drained. After getting the update from Tibby that the birth was a success, Carmen can't help but be teary-eyed. Ian approaches her, wondering what has happened. Carmen shares that she now has a baby brother. Then she relays how it's always been her and her mother from the start, and now that they have new additions to their family, everything feels surreal. Carmen also apologizes for her recent performances. Ian empathizes with her because he, as well as everyone else, knows she's got it in her. He invites her to dinner so they can talk about it. Carmen declines, saying he and Julia must have had their own plans for the night. At this, Ian is aghast. He says he only went out with Julia that one time because she begged him. If there's anyone he wants to go out with, it's Carmen. Carmen is still thinking about her conversation with Ian when she returns to the theater. Then she gets distracted when she overhears Bill and Julia's conversation. Understandably, Bill is upset. But what angers Carmen is what Julia says next. She says Carmen is just insecure, and perhaps at the end of the day, she just doesn't have what it takes. This angers Carmen a lot, so for the remaining days before the show, she does her best to keep the role. On the day of the show, she receives a package from Tibby. It's a recording of her mom's message on her big day. It also contains Tibby's awkward but well-meaning wish for her to be successful. Carmen now has enough energy to be her best on their first showing. After the play, she still has enough energy to go to Ian and kiss him fully on the lips. A week later, Carmen is packing her bags to go home. Julia approaches her and reproaches her for not speaking to her after the success of the show. She tells Carmen that it's thanks to her that she's enjoying her success. For the first time in her life, Carmen fights back. Julia has done nothing for her, except teaching her one thing. That is, no one can bring her down unless she allows it. And she has allowed Julia to put her backstage for a long time. She's sorry for taking what Julia thinks is hers, but it's time for her to make something out of herself. Back to Tibby. Her experience with Carmen's mothers has opened a whole new perspective when it comes to motherhood. She knows she's still afraid to face change, but when she remembers how peaceful the mother was, how that tiny human being is now the source of the mother's happiness, Tibby can't help but wonder if she'd feel that way too, had the pregnancy been confirmed. As she muses about her situation, Brian walks up to her. He's broken up with Effie. What's good about Brian is that his honesty influences Tibby to be honest too. After telling him all her fears, Brian reminds her that not everyone she loves is going to leave her. All she needs is a little faith. She nods, and this time, she finds in herself the courage to finally take that leap. It seems like everything is all right with their individual lives, but what about their sisterhood? Lena calls them and tells them that Effie brought the pair of pants to Greece to get back to Tibby and unfortunately lost them. They gather again at the yoga hall, and they blame each other for the mishap. Secrets are coming out, much to the shock of others. Tibby suggests they should forget the pants. It's supposed to bring them together, yet they all realize they are growing apart even with them sharing the garment. To resolve the issue, Lena volunteers to go to Greece to look for it. However, Effie calls Bridget and tells her that there may be no hope of finding the pants. On the other hand, Effie tells her about Costas and his annulment. So Bridget, Tibby, and Carmen all decide to follow Lena. They are only pretending to help her look for the pants, but in truth, they want her to get back with Costas. Because even if she doesn't tell them, they all know Lena is still in love with him. Lena finds out about their plan, however. She cries as she says she doesn't want to be hurt by him again. That night, Lena can't sleep. She looks at the full moon that illuminates the night sky. Then she remembers what Costas said about Sailor's Moon, the light that gives people luck and helps them find what they're looking for. She gets inspiration, so she runs down to the port. There she sees Costas, as if he's been waiting for her. She walks up to him and admits that she still loves him. Lucky for her, Costas feels the same way too. She spends the rest of the night by his side. They never found the pants, but they have found forgiveness for their shortcomings this past summer. As Carmen narrates at the end of the movie, the pants' last gift to the sisterhood is to bring them together again, but this time, with stronger bonds than ever. The pants are only ever a piece of clothing. The real magic of friendship comes from learning how to be themselves without losing each other.